Snow was falling in thick, white sheets across the empty prairie when the girl reached the wooden gate of the ranch. Her boots were worn through at the toes, and her thin coat was stiff with ice. She stood there for a long moment, gripping the wooden post as the cold wind pushed against her, like it wanted to throw her back onto the road she had come from. Her name was Clara, and she had been walking for 3 days. The ranch house stood alone against the gray sky, smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Horses shifted in the corral nearby, their breath rising in white clouds. It was the first place she had seen in miles. Clara swallowed hard and forced herself to walk toward the door. Her stomach hurt with hunger, and her fingers had gone numb hours ago. When she finally reached the porch, she hesitated, staring at the rough wooden door. Then she knocked. Inside, a chair scraped against the floor. Heavy boots crossed the room. The door opened slowly, and a tall man filled the doorway. He looked to be in his late 30s, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard dusted with gray. His eyes were sharp but tired, the kind of eyes that had seen too many winters alone. He looked down at the trembling girl on his porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Snow drifted quietly between them. "Sir," Clara's voice was barely more than a whisper. "I'm looking for work." The cowboy studied her carefully. Her cheeks were pale with cold, and her hands shook as she held them together. "What kind of work?" he asked. "Anything," she said quickly. "Cooking, cleaning, washing clothes. I can work hard, I promise." The wind gusted again, blowing snow across the porch. The cowboy glanced past her toward the empty road. There was nothing out there but miles of frozen land. "You come alone?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You got family?" Clara lowered her eyes. "No." The cowboy leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. For a long time he said nothing. His gaze drifted across the falling snow as if he were thinking about something far away. Finally he sighed. "I already got 2 ranch hands," he said. "Don't need another worker." Clara felt her chest tighten. She nodded slowly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I understand, sir." She turned slightly, preparing to walk back into the storm. Then the cowboy spoke again. "But—" Clara stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, as if the next words were harder to say than any he had spoken in years. "Truth is," he said slowly, "I don't need a worker." He looked directly at her. "I need a wife more than a worker." Clara blinked, certain she had heard him wrong. "I'm sorry, what?" The cowboy cleared his throat. "Name's Daniel Carter," he said. "Been running this ranch alone for near 6 years." His eyes moved briefly toward the dark interior of the house behind him. "Since my wife died." The words hung in the cold air. Clara felt a strange mixture of confusion and fear twist inside her chest. "I'm not asking for romance," Daniel added quickly. "Just someone to share the place. Cook meals. Keep the house warm." He gestured toward the wide, empty land around them. "A ranch gets mighty quiet in winter." Snowflakes landed on Clara's hair and melted slowly. "You offering me marriage?" she asked softly. Daniel shrugged. "Offering you a home," he said. "Food, warm bed, safety." Clara stared at him, trying to understand the strange turn her life had taken in the span of a minute. 3 days ago, she had been sleeping behind a stable in a town that didn't want her. Now a stranger was offering her a life. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Don't need to know much," he said. "I know you knocked on my door instead of stealing from my barn. That tells me enough." The wind howled across the prairie again. Clara's legs trembled from exhaustion. "If I say no?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded toward the distant hills. "Then you keep walking." There was no cruelty in his voice, only honesty. Clara looked past him into the warm glow of the cabin. She could smell wood smoke and something cooking. Her stomach growled painfully. She thought about the long, frozen road behind her, about the nights she had spent hungry and alone. Slowly, she looked back up at the cowboy standing in the doorway. "What kind of wife would you expect?" she asked. Daniel hesitated before answering. "The kind that stays." Clara studied his face carefully. There was loneliness there, deep and quiet. But there was no meanness. After a long silence, she said something that surprised even herself. "I can cook," she said. Daniel gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Well," he said, stepping aside and opening the door wider, "that's a good start." Clara crossed the threshold of the ranch house. Warm air wrapped around her instantly. She didn't know it yet, but the snowstorm outside that night would change both of their lives forever. And by the time spring came to the prairie, neither of them would remember what loneliness felt like anymore. But on that first night, both of them were still strangers, trying to understand the strange promise that had just been made. Clara stood near the door of the small ranch house, unsure of where to put her hands or even where to look. The warmth of the room made her cheeks sting as the frozen feeling slowly left her skin. The cabin was simple but sturdy. A stone fireplace burned brightly, throwing orange light across rough wooden walls. A large table stood near the center of the room, and the smell of beef stew drifted through the air. Clara realized suddenly how hungry she was. Daniel removed his coat and hung it beside the door. "You can sit," he said quietly. Clara stepped toward the table, still cautious as if the warmth around her might vanish at any moment. She lowered herself onto a chair. Daniel moved to the stove and lifted the lid from a heavy iron pot. Steam rose into the air. "Hope you like stew," he said. "It's about the only thing I cook." Clara managed a small smile. "Anything warm sounds good." He filled a bowl and set it in front of her, then placed a piece of bread beside it. For a moment, she simply stared at the food. The last full meal she had eaten felt like a lifetime ago. "Go ahead," Daniel said gently. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She picked up the spoon and took a careful bite. The warmth spread through her body almost instantly, and she had to blink quickly to keep tears from forming. Daniel sat across from her but didn't eat. He simply watched her for a moment, then looked down at the table. "What's your name?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "Clara." "Where are you from, Clara?" She hesitated. "East of here, small town near the river." Daniel nodded slowly. "Family?" Clara stared at the steam rising from her bowl. "Gone," she said quietly. Daniel didn't press further. He seemed to understand the kind of silence that followed those kinds of answers. They ate quietly for a while. The storm outside grew stronger, wind rattling the windows and pushing snow against the walls. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. Clara looked up. "About the marriage," he added. "You can stay here a few days, see how things feel." She studied him carefully. "Why would you trust me like that?" Daniel shrugged. "Figure if you were trouble, you wouldn't have knocked first." Clara looked around the warm room again. It felt unreal compared to the frozen road she had been walking that morning. "What happened to your wife?" she asked softly. Daniel's eyes moved toward the fireplace. "Fever," he said after a moment. "Came quick one winter. Doctor was 2 days away." The words were simple, but the pain behind them was heavy. Clara lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." Daniel nodded once, then he stood and carried the empty bowls to the sink. "There's a spare room down the hall," he said. "Bed small, but warm." Clara rose slowly from the table. She hesitated before speaking again. "Thank you, Daniel." It was the first time she had used his name. He gave a small nod and returned to washing the dishes. Clara walked down the narrow hallway. The room he had mentioned was simple, but clean. A small bed stood beside a window where snow tapped softly against the glass. She sat on the edge of the mattress. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. But before she slept, she whispered something to herself. "Maybe, just maybe, this is where my life starts again." Morning came with bright sunlight reflecting off endless white snow. Clara woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly and stepped into the main room. Daniel was already outside through the open door, carrying a bucket of water from the well. Clara glanced around the kitchen instinctively. She moved toward the stove and began preparing breakfast from the supplies she found. Eggs, bread, bacon. By the time Daniel returned, the table was set. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. "You didn't have to do that," he said. Clara shrugged lightly. "I said I could cook." Daniel looked at the meal, then at her. A slow smile appeared beneath his beard. It was the first real smile she had seen from him. "Guess you did say that." They ate together, the quiet between them no longer uncomfortable. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch covered in brilliant white snow. After breakfast, Daniel pulled on his coat. "Ranch work doesn't stop for weather," he said. Clara stood and reached for her own coat. "Then you better show me where to start." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You sure?" Clara nodded. "If I'm staying here, I should earn my place." For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he opened the door and stepped aside for her. Sunlight poured across the snow-covered land. Clara stepped out beside him into the bright morning. The ranch stretched wide and silent around them. Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "Welcome to the Carter Ranch." Clara looked across the open prairie, feeling something warm and hopeful growing inside her chest. And though neither of them said it yet, both of them were beginning to realize that the strange offer made during a snowstorm might become the best decision either of them had ever made.